Hi, my name is Judy Bandy, and I'm so honored to be a part of the LDA conference. I am going to give you an overview of mindful parenting today, learning to respond rather than react. I am a former school nurse and now ADHD coach and work with parents and families on how to manage executive function weaknesses in particular. So we're going to talk briefly about executive functions today, learning to pause, how we can observe and develop new perspectives before we respond with our kids. When I was a school nurse, our kids would go on a ski trip. I live in Minnesota, and we worked to help them support their executive functions so that they could go on this ski trip seamlessly, have everything they needed, arrive on time, all of those different things. And so the kids that we worked with, particularly around ADHD in the school, we used this as an opportunity to practice those skills. So the kids came in, put their skis and supplies in a place, attendants did what they needed to do, got their stuff, got on the bus, went to the ski hill, and I got a call from one of the moms. And she said that her son did not have her skis. And I went down to the room where they had all stored their skis, and he had left his skis at the school. And my heart sank, and her heart sank. And I think what's so important is that how we view the skis being in this room and how we respond is so critical. Because if we respond that this child was just irresponsible, didn't really want his skis, was careless, was lazy, that takes us on one path, which is not a good path because he ends up feeling ashamed of himself. If we can see it as executive function dysfunction, then we have a way to respond in a way that's affirming and yet try to keep learning how to move forward. I really do believe what Ross Greene says, that children do well if they can, not if they want to. Doing well is always better than not doing well. And our thoughts inform our actions. What's fundamental in terms of ADHD, and I know there are lots of other learning disabilities as well, but for ADHD, ADHD is not just about attention. It's about our ability to inhibit ourselves, to self-regulate ourselves, and use our executive functions to do what we don't want to do. And these develop over time. And there's kind of this pyramid of support. So for me to show my abilities and talents, I have to be able to manage impulsivity and get started and focus and be aware of what I need to do, remember what I have to do, manage my time, internalize all that I'm thinking in a way that's helpful to manage my stress, be motivated, and problem solve it to get it done. So this will work on things I'm interested in, and it will for our kids as well. Unfortunately, children that have brain injuries, their executive functions kind of can't work in any setting, but kids with ADHD, their executive functions support them. What's interesting, what's more boring is harder. And so it's just so important for us to always try to frame first what's going on with our kids. It's also important to remember that these kids are delayed about a third of their age. And this is the scaffolding that parents feel like they're having to pride, and they can't always put words to it about what's going on. But our 12-year-olds are more like 8 or 9-year-olds in their ability to manage their day. And 18-year-olds can be more like a junior higher in their ability to manage their day. And so we have to remember that in what we're seeing, there's also a brain delay here. And so when you think about a situation we're having with our kids, the underlying executive functions that could be letting them down, it's always helpful to consider that. So somebody getting trouble getting out the door on time, they have to manage their time, they have to sustain attention, they have to remember the steps, they have to transition. When kids leave things at sports practices, right, they're disorganized, they're having trouble, they may be impulsive and just go without thinking about it. They have to focus long enough to do it. Again, manage time. They may have, instead of talking to their friends, parents are there, they're going to go in a hurry, like they're not managing time. If they're having difficulty getting something done at home, can they sustain their attention through it? Can they transition? Can they pull off of what they're doing interesting to start something they don't want to do? Can they remember all the steps? Will they manage their time? Can they find the motivation? Written expression is highly executive function work. So these kids often have trouble getting started and coming up with an idea and organizing all of their ideas in their head and using their working memory, persisting, managing their time, editing. I mean, it's so much executive function work. Same with reading, like they get to the bottom of the page and don't remember what they've read because their executive functions have let them down. Sometimes these kids are really confused about feedback they're getting, and that's their metacognition. They think they're doing better than they kind of are presenting in the world, but they're just a little disconnected. So again, when we're looking at the challenges you're facing with your child, we have to first kind of stop and see what the executive functions are. And I just want to validate that parenting kids with executive function weaknesses is stressful. There's more demands on you. There's inconsistency. You can kind of think you've got the plan in place and all of a sudden you don't. You have to adjust, what you think should be a little bit. And there's certainly fears and concerns about their future, right? And this is challenging because you will support the kids longer. You have to give them the gift of time sometimes. So there's a big impact in our families and in our relationships with these kids. And I think it's helpful to see this cycle in terms of when parents are stressed and trying to meet the demands of their kids, they're going to have more negative cognitions, they're going to be more isolated, they're going to be reduced self-care, which puts them in a position of maybe being a little more negative and punishment and irritable. And so the child's receiving really less encouragement and praise and approval and warmth. And then they're going to behave with more defiance and argument and stubbornness, which reinforces your parents, like what you think, which reinforces your stress. So what mindful parenting really does is help you. It helps you possibly be able to manage stress and pause and look at things with a new perspective. And can you emotionally regulate and find some objectivity in the middle of all you're facing, so that the child can receive more acceptance even in the middle of what they're doing. And that acceptance is more encouraging for them, which builds their self-awareness that can help them be a little more collaborative, and your relationship can be a little bit restored. And so that's what we're talking about with mindful parenting, is how can you pause, notice the stress, manage the stress, and maybe come to your child a little bit differently, which then can shift the whole relationship. So mindful parenting is simply building a pause. It's observing what is and trying to be at choice with your response. It's not detachment. It's not apathy. It's not like putting up your hands or something we can do. It's not being so present that you have no regard or no mindfulness about, like, we've got to change some things here. That's not what it is. It's simply being able to pause before you respond. And so you can learn to pay attention to yourself and to what's going on around you. You can begin to set your intention, like, what is your purpose in this moment? Are you going to need to just really be authority because it's a safety issue? Or can you come with some understanding and curiosity and patience? And what is your attitude in it? So can you open up in a way that you can be curious and accept the situation for what it is, to begin there to problem solve it? Oops, sorry. Okay. So mindfulness can be practiced both formally and informally. So informal is where you kind of drop into the situation. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about here. Formal would be more yoga and intentional mindfulness meditations, which are all very valuable as well, but that's not going to be the focus of this conversation. So let's just think for a minute. Mindlessness is when I'm lost in thought. And there's times it's great to daydream, right? It's great to just kind of be whatever. But we're often on autopilot in those places. And sometimes being on autopilot, we miss situations, which we're going to talk about here. Being more mindful is being more aware and being able to observe what's going on, to be present, rather than just automatically assuming there's something, assuming all that you know about a situation. So step one of mindful parenting is to see your child through an executive function lens, which is what we've kind of been talking about in terms of what executive functions are letting yourself down. Become an executive function detective first. Okay. The second step is to understand our stress responses. So we have sort of these three main parts of the brain that we're going to talk around in terms of the stress response. And Dan Siegel has a great hand model where this is your amygdala, which is really the danger and alert center of our brain that scans our universe to know when things are wrong. The hippocampus is a memory center very close to the amygdala, and those are, memories and our emotions are often tied together. And our prefrontal cortex, which is this part of our brain in the hand model, is our thinking part of our brain, right? So when our amygdala fires, our lids will flip. We will not be able to think so clearly, and we will have a physical reaction to the stress. So when our stress response, when our brain scans the environment and feels like something is dangerous, our heart's going to race, we'll increase our breathing rate, we can have our stomach ache, we can have our muscles tighten, right? But we really are going to focus on the stressor. We're going to focus on what's upsetting us and what seems dangerous at the time. And so are the kids. So our lids fill up and all we can focus on is the stressor. And so that can become a challenge when we're trying to mindfully parent because we're upset and we're just zeroed in on what's wrong and we're trying to widen our angle of what we see. So the second step is understanding the stress response and understanding your body in it. How can you tell in your body that your lid's beginning to flip and you're not going to be able to think as clearly, right? What triggers you? Is it a time of day? Are there certain transitions? Is it certain requests? How do you, and what do you anticipate? A lot of times parents will tell me, oh, when I have to open that grade book, I can just tell I'm tightening up, right? That's your stress response. So the first thing for parents is to kind of understand that. And when that's happening, the third step is to stop and take a big, deep breath. In, out, in, out. Because the reality is when we're breathing deep, our bodies cannot be in a stress response because our stress response requires us to breathe faster. So the breath is both automatic, but we can be intentional about it too. So you can really use the breath to pause. And I encourage you to practice throughout the day, just taking big, deep breaths. Use a mindfulness app. Use reminders on your phone, right? But also think about it in terms of when you're going into a trigger situation. If there's something you got to talk to your kids about, or they're coming home, or whatever those times of the day in the morning when you're trying to get them out the door, how can you intentionally keep deep breathing? So if we can notice the stress response, and we've got the executive function lens, and then take a big deep breath. Now, when we're breathing, we're going to stop and observe. The first thing you observe is feelings, and you label your feelings. Try to get away, try getting away from I am frustrated, I am mad, because we limit ourselves to that. If we can just label it, frustration is here, joy, grief, sorrow, excitement. There's just a little bit of space between us and our emotions so we can think about it a little bit differently and do something differently about it. Just label the emotion you have, because then you're identifying it. You're not being controlled by it. You're recognizing it. And expand our feeling vocabulary, because how many times do we just say we're really mad, but you could be from bothered to fuming, right? You could be glad, you could kind of be relaxed and pleased, or you could just be thrilled, so it's helpful to expand our feeling vocabulary to get that realm. The other thing that's really helpful to consider is what's behind anger. And I encourage you to do this. I encourage you to do this with your kids. I encourage you to ask your kids what they think is behind your anger, because it can be so many different things, right? It can be disappointment, it can be fear, it can be anxiety, it can be sadness. And what I had a mother say, wow, I think for my son, it's embarrassment. And I asked her how that changed her perspective. And she said, I have more empathy for him when I can think what's behind his anger. So it's really can be a very helpful pause to consider what else might be there. The other thing I'd like to share about emotions is the term chronic sorrow. So chronic sorrow is reoccurring and intermittent episodes of sadness. So there'll be times there's joy and things are going well, and then you can kind of hit these dips of being sorrowful. It's not the same as grief. It kind of ebbs and flows. They're often triggered around times when kids have developmental milestones they're trying to reach, and other kids are reaching them, but your child may not quite be there. And there can be some sadness around that. And I just encourage you to name it for what it is, do some self-care, think about it, and decide what you do with that in yourself. But sometimes just naming it can be helpful. So if I can see myself, start with an executive function lens, notice my stress response, take a big deep breath, label my feelings. Now we're going to look at our thoughts, and thoughts and feelings are very tightly together, but we're going to try to label our thoughts. And one of the things I think that can be helpful is to think that in the moment, and am I bringing up a lot of past emotions and circumstances? Like, am I saying this is the 500th time I've tried to get him to do his chores? This is the 30th time we've tried this strategy in the morning to get him out the door, and this is still where we are. So we're bringing up the past. Or do I go to the future and say, they are never going to get to a job on time. They're never going to be a successful adult. They're going to, just jumping ahead because they can't do this thing right now. We're linking it to something in the future. And what that happens to our kids and what that happens to us in the moment is we're really putting a lot of things on the present moment, either from the past or the future, that cloud and put a lot more emotion and pressure on the present moment that we're trying to solve. And I think that's sometimes what kids react to, right? They're like, we're jumping to these places. And so I think it's important that we try to see what's currently happening and where do our thought patterns go. So when there's a failed test or missing assignments, or they can't get started, or they can't stop video games, or whatever the things are, that we're trying to look at the situation in the moment first. And there can be times that it's helpful to say, this is the 500th time we've done that. Like, what can we do differently? But in the moment when you're working with them, try to pause it a little bit and notice your thought patterns, because I think it's really helpful to frame thoughts as either helpful or unhelpful in the moment, and we can grab onto these thoughts like balloons, or we can let them go. So for the purpose of the moment, if you're trying to help your child with a homework assignment, it's probably not helpful to think about your concerns about them passing the class or whether they're going to be successful as an adult, right? You got to get through this assignment. Another time, away from that moment, it may be helpful to say, we have a pattern here of math. He's really struggling with math. What can we do about that? But when you're helping him with a math assignment struggling, we don't have to put all of that worry into that moment, is basically the thought. So once we've been able to pause and take a big deep breath, notice our stress response, and label our emotions and thoughts, we are now ready to consider our response. You can't really consider your response until you've checked in with yourself. We got to do an internal check before I can be ready to respond. And one of the ways to think about responding is a different framework, that when we're in an expectation framework, we are result oriented and we want something to be happening. It should be happening. And it's pretty black and white. It's either there or it's not. And when it's not met, we can feel disillusioned and irritable and frustrated. And we're tense about it, because I expect you to be able to pick up your room. I expect you this, I expect you that. And when we're not, it can be very frustrating. Or, other kids your age are doing this. You should be doing this. There's a lot of shoulds. If you can switch your language, if we can switch our language to goals. I have a goal that my child's gonna be able to get out the door independently. I have a goal that they will be able to follow through on their chores. I have a goal they're going to be able to self-advocate to their teachers. I should not just assume as a ninth grader, they've got that skill. If they don't have the skill, they don't have the skill. So I can switch to a goal and say, I have a goal for that. You become more process oriented, and you begin to adjust and make and see it differently. And it can, and it can really open you up to the possibilities of problem solving, which is one of the things we're going to talk about. So if you can begin to see the difference, when I can be in a goal or responding mindset, right? I can recognize where we're at. I cannot put a should on it. I can just say it is what it is. And I can acknowledge what needs changed for sure, and consider solutions that are a little bit more concrete. And really what's undercurrent this theme is I'll be more wise, calm, compassionate, and thoughtful. Whereas if I'm in the reacting mode, which is often the expectation mode, it's my default response. And I'm often when I'm stressed and hurried, right? And I'm reacting to what should be, what I want to be, rather than what is. And oftentimes those things are out of my control. And so it can be difficult to be thoughtful there. And I'm going to be more angry and frustrated. And so in the responding mode, in terms of thoughts, I'm able to discern better. I'm just able to have more insight and try to figure out what's appropriate, rather than being pretty narrow, black and white, critical, kind of stuck in blame, really, and frustration. So how this could play out is my child has 5 missing assignments, right? My reaction thoughts could be, when will my child ever follow through? This year was going to be different. We talked about these last week. She's irresponsible and doesn't, even use a planner to help. I'm not sure she'll ever graduate from high school. And we name those thoughts. We don't give ourselves judgment for those thoughts. You just have to decide if those are the helpful thoughts you want to base your response on, right? Because when we're in that place, we are going to be reacting with more blame and frustration and punishment. If we can then substitute more of a responsive mode. I love my child for who she is. What executive functions are letting him down? Is there any relationship? What can I figure out about why, what these assignments are missing? How much is my child feeling in this? I can pause before I address the situation, because I want to explore and be curious. I'm going to consider medication, time frame, executive functions. I'm going to explore what's blocking them and begin to teach the child or figure it out together. So it's not that we aren't going to have those reaction thoughts, but you have to decide if they're helpful for me right now. And if they're not, take a big deep breath, label it, replace it. And so when I can pause and want to come at it from a goal mindset and a responsive mindset, I'm going to determine it is what it is before I problem solve. And this is how I call it. You're going to bottom line what it is you're problem solving, what's really going on. And this can take a little bit of time and curiosity. So I'm going to give you an example. This is a real example of a parent who came in, 5 missing assignments, super frustrated. She started in very much the reactive mode. They had done all of these things to shore this up, and she was over it. She was ready to ground her child for 2 weeks, at least, like she was just done. And so we asked these questions. What if this was the first time I had confronted this? She said, I'd be curious. And I said, what's new or different? This year, my son likes to go to school. He's on medication. He's in the school play. He really is more confident. Began to shift her thinking a little bit. We talked about her child's strengths. We talked about the different perspectives to consider. And she said, when I really look at it, his missing assignments are only in French. French is the last period of the day. All the assignments missing are writing assignments. We thought about what the child might be experiencing. She said he's very overwhelmed, and writing is even hard for him in English, right? What executive functions are letting him down? Most of them, for sure. And so when we said, it is what it is, son is struggling with writing assignments in French class. Now you have a place through her discernment to begin to problem solve. Rather than it being this big thing, it's really writing assignments in French is where we're at. For instance, a science project that's they really procrastinated on, and we can just jump to all these places. Maybe they missed the day that the project was explained. Maybe there's a packet that had to be done 6 pages long, and it had to be 2 handwritten. It's too long. Maybe there's a presentation at the end of the class, and he doesn't want to present in front of everybody, so they won't do the assignment. Could be the topic is so open-ended that they have 3 great ideas and they can't decide. And they waited too long to decide. Might have forgotten about a scout trip the weekend before, right? Could have forgotten the rubric. He might be overwhelmed with all the requirements. Or there might be drawings involved and they're a great drawer. So they've spent all of their time in the creation place, but not getting the rest of it done. We don't know until we drill it down. Oftentimes parents will tell me, these kids don't tell the truth. They lie to me. And that's very disturbing, right? And parents react from the place of really the worst thing they can do is tell me I've lies. And I've taught my child the importance of telling the truth. And I'm angry. And he brings some of this on himself when he's not honest. But when you can take a big deep breath, label those thoughts and feelings, and begin to wonder, how much of this first response is unfiltered? He hasn't thought about it. How much is he avoiding the truth because they plan on taking care of it and then they forget, but they don't really want to talk about it? Are they feeling shame? Is there an anxiousness they want to avoid? How is your reaction if you were honest? I think that's an important question. I think we need to also ask what we know. Sometimes we will ask kids, how'd you do on a test, to see what they say, but we know how they did on the test, and that's not very respectful. And have we paused when asking our child? I want you to go up and look at your room and tell me what's left to finish up to get that room picked up. Or I want you to go look at your toothbrush, see if it's wet, and then tell me if you've brushed your teeth. Like building the pause so they have to think about it. Somebody intends on coming and then doesn't. Right? Our reaction mode is she must absolutely have a technology addiction, right? She'll never be responsible. If it weren't for me, she wouldn't be able to get anywhere. So frustrated. So can you label the thoughts and feelings you have and then go into a responsive mindset where you begin wondering with different perspectives, what is so hard about stopping her video game? How is she aware of time? Does she even like hockey practice where she's going? What's the best way to manage technology, right? What's the developmental age of her executive functions? So that you begin to be, now you can figure out, where they are. So if you can help determine the it is what it is, and sometimes you can determine the it is what it is without talking to your child, you can kind of take a guess and sometimes not. But then we're going to try to communicate and we're going to try to get more information. But before we can do this part of parenting, we have to stop ourselves, notice our stress response, label our thoughts and feelings, see if we're in that reactive mode or if we can switch ourselves into the responsive goal mode and then move forward. And so we have to begin to move forward as curiosity. It's all in our questions. And as parents, it's so easy to jump to problem solving. And when we're talking, we're going to know the next thing we're going to say. But it's so important to seek to understand before being understood. And keep listening and asking follow-up questions. And this really helps our kids' metacognition when they can articulate these. So we need to avoid the why questions. They cannot answer those very easily. What got in the way? What did you do instead? How are you going to remind yourself? What's your next step? What's your first step? We can begin by saying, it is what it is. You're having trouble with French writing assignment. What's up with that? Can we just say the very bottom line, be very specific with the difficulty, and then what's up? How does this impact you? What do you wish I would do differently? If kids are saying, I don't know, you can begin to ask kids to scale. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much is this? How much of it is this, right? How motivated are you to start to 1 to 5? How much do you understand at 1 to 5? You can always take a guess because kids will tell you if you're wrong. I have a hunch that, you're having a hard time connecting with that teacher and you're pretty lost in class. They'll tell you if it's right or wrong. And so this was, an example of how this played out. So my son wouldn't get off technology to go to football practice, no matter how many warnings I gave him and how many timers we used. I am frustrated, overwhelmed, and over trying to help him. So that's her reaction place, right? That's that place. She took a deep breath to get herself to the goal mindset and responsive mode. And she said, you have a difficulty stopping your video game to go to football practice. What's up with that? And he goes, I don't know. And she said, could it be you lose track of time? He said, not really. How much do you like football practice? Not so much. What's up with not liking football practice? I thought I would have more friends by now on the team. There's the aha moment. That's partly what you have to discuss and problem solve, is he's having a hard time feeling accepted on the team. At teeth brushing time, I got so exasperated when for the 12th time of ignored instruction occurred. But the parent paused, took a big deep breath, and made a choice. I left him alone and went to read with my daughter. He ended up brushing his teeth eventually and went into his room, but it was too late for him to read with me. Instead, we cuddled and I started asking a question. What is it that causes you to hit a roadblock brushing your teeth? Maybe I don't like going to bed, he answered pretty quickly. Is there something in particular you don't like about going to bed? I said, I don't usually feel tired enough to want to go to bed, and I don't like laying here waiting to feel tired. And my feet get hot. I move my feet to a colder spot in the bed, and I don't like how those colder spots go away as I lay there longer. So there you go. Now they started talking about ideas about how to fall asleep or how to keep his feet cool. But you didn't, she thought it was about the brushing the teeth, or he just wasn't managing time or all of that. But what it was about was he didn't really want to come to bed too soon. She wouldn't have known that if she didn't ask. Every morning, it's so difficult to get my son out of bed and move through the morning routine. I dread the mornings and can get so exasperated that every morning is the same. So she paused and decided to ask a question. What do you need in the morning to get out of bed? I want 5 more minutes and you to stay in the room. I'll stay on the floor and set the timer for 5 minutes, she said. And after 5 minutes, I told him it was time. And he got out of bed and started getting dressed. And I gave him praise for doing so and commented on how nice it is to have time before he gets his ride gets here. He did all of the routine and came downstairs with plenty of time for breakfast. He received a lot of praise for the good morning. This implements behavioral momentum, the principle of behavioral momentum, which is where if you can commit to 5 to 7 minutes to getting a task going, a lot of times they can carry it forward. And the reality is we can spend more than 5 to 7 minutes back and forth, asking, trying to prod, trying to get things going. If we can just set aside 5 to 7 minutes, be present to get the thing going, sometimes that can carry them forward. It's important in our communication, after we've been curious, and those are just some of the examples, to acknowledge before we request. Acknowledgement is very important. Validating emotions, acknowledging what you see, because our kids need to feel seen. They need to feel validated. Sometimes you can make a request and sometimes you just need to acknowledge. So I know it's hard for you to quit your game to go to hockey. It can be frustrating, but stop the game now so we can go. You're still making the request that needs to happen, but you are acknowledging for them what their experience may be in it. I imagine you're tired and don't want to start your homework. It must be hard when you've been in school all day. Let's get started together and see how that might help you get finished so you can go play. I miss our conversations during the summer when you don't have to be pressured with homework. It must be draining for your brain to try to learn the way some classes are taught. It can be so powerful to do that. And I think let's not forget encouragement. With mindful parenting, we have to encourage. It's the foundation of all positive relationships. We want to remember to focus on their character traits, who they are, and not just the outcomes. We're going to focus on, on who they are. And so, and that's so respectful and honoring. Wow, when you played with a little neighbor boy, I really saw your kindness. So you link what you see in them to what you observed. Write these down, text them to kids, put them on Post-it notes, say them as you go by, drive by compliments. But whatever you do, try to encourage your child because they don't see it in themselves sometimes, and they need 10 positives to every negative, right? Another thing to be conscious about is the peer pressure you can feel as parents. Label that. What are your thoughts and feelings about it? How much are you getting caught up in your child's achievement as a reflection of ourselves? And as a parent, we want our kids to behave. We want our kids to do well. Are we comparing our kids to others and feeling that pressure? Sometimes this happens even within families, where you're feeling that. Remember, you have to provide a developmentally appropriate supervision, which is from Chris Dundy, and our support will ebb and flow. But just recognize what this can be doing kind of to you and how you feel compared to other parents, which leads us into giving ourselves self-compassion. Self-compassion is so critical to mindful parenting because it just opens yourself up to be able to be more available emotionally. And we need to learn to give ourselves the same kindness and care we'd give to a friend. So in self-compassion, there's sort of three tenets, like three coins with, depending on which side of the coin you're on. One is self-kindness, or are you judgmental of yourself? Do you feel isolated and really alone in your journey? Or do you feel like you have others you can walk this with? And this is part of the journey of parenting kids with executive function weaknesses, or part of the journey helping kids with learning disabilities. And do you over-identify, get caught up in all the negative emotions of it? Or are you able to separate a little bit like we've talked about today? Be mindful, accept, acknowledge, it is what it is. We're going to figure it out. So explore self-compassion and how you can do that with yourselves. To show compassion for your child, I really encourage you to look at the 12 exercises for mindful parenting by Mila and John Kabat-Zinn. I've picked out a couple of the 12. Keeping one of these in front of you for a week can be really life-changing. Try to imagine the world from your child's point of view, purposely letting go of your own. Do this every day for at least a few minutes to remind you of who this child is and what he or she faces in the world. Imagine how you appear and sound from your child's point of view, having you as a parent today in this moment. How might this modify how you carry yourself in your body and space, and how you speak and what you say? How do you want to relate to your child in this moment? So take a look at those, print one out, put it on your mirror or put it somewhere to remind yourself how you might want to come. So this was a very quick overview. I do this as a 6-week parent group that we talk about it, but I'm glad to share kind of an overview of how you can pause, how you can take a big deep breath, how you can first check in with yourself, label your thoughts and your feelings without judgment for yourself. They are what they are, but decide if you're going to hook into those or whether you want to breathe deep and come at it from a different stage, so that you can explore with your child what's going on to get to some, solution side. Remember that you're shepherds, not engineers. This is a journey for you. And ultimately, your relationship with your child is most important, because for these kids with learning disabilities and executive function disabilities, they're going to take a little longer to get there. So you want the relationship to be able to stand the span of time that they're going to need. And remember, this progress is seen in months to years, not days to weeks. So it can feel very laborious that you're not getting headway. But if you look 6 months ago, 8 months ago, you're still dealing with challenges, but they might be different challenges. And celebrate your child, highlight their strengths. Really say to yourself every day what you love about them and what you cherish about them, and pass that on to your kids. And remain as patient as you can, and really allow the gift of time to help your child shine. They need more time to develop these skills. Their brain needs time to develop. So give them the gift of time, because the world will tell them different things than you want them to know. And stay curious and collaborative as you're working through it. So I complete this with a thought. I had a parent, I had a high school senior and her mom in my office several years ago, and they had gone through a lot. She was late diagnosed, so there had been a lot of misunderstanding and stress around it. Their relationship, they were working hard on. And she turned to her mom and she said, Mom, I feel like I'm building one of those like Grecian arcs. And they need a center pole. They need a center thing keeping that up while it's being built. And I feel like you're that pole for me. And if you can stay steady, when a brick falls off, the whole thing doesn't have to collapse, because I then can pick up my brick and go back to building, because you're keeping everything else that was shored up. And she said, that's what I need you to be. And I think it was a beautiful description of what mindful parenting is. Stay steady, stay calm, notice, and don't give yourself judgment for being overwhelmed and having the thoughts and feelings you have, but notice them and decide, are you gonna hold on to those? Or are you gonna let them go and try to come at it from a more curious, open framework? So thanks again. Hope the rest of the conference goes well. Feel free to email me with any questions. I'm sorry I can't be there live to interact with you. Have a good day.